Mike, what are you doing?
Hi, Daddy. I'm playing the Wii.
We're playing the Wii. You know what? I got an idea.
Oh no!
Hey, get back here! Aha! Listen. It's called Intellivision. It's really a fun system. Come on, give it a try. Come on, even the name, Intellivision. It sounds fun, doesn't it? Intelligent. Come on.
It sounds kind of stupid, but okay.
Come on, give it a try. Come on.
Do I have?
Yeah, come on, give it a try.
Here's my Intellivision collection. Here is my Intellivision that was purchased way back in 1979, still working to this very day. Original controllers as well. As bad as the controllers are, they do still work. And there's some misconception about the Intellivision. Not a lot, but just a couple. One of them is that Sega touted the Genesis as the first 16-bit console. Now, they released that in 1988 in Japan and 1989 in the US, but that's inaccurate. The Mattel Intellivision is, in fact, and is the world's first 16-bit video game console. It was a 16-bit console from 1979. Obviously, the graphics wouldn't compare to the Sega Genesis, but their touting of theirs being the first 16-bit console is inaccurate. The Mattel Intellivision was the first 16-bit console. Now, you see here I have the computer module over here. This was actually, I hate to use the word garbage, but that's pretty much what it is. Now, I actually had the original Intellivision computer component. I'll post a picture here in a second. So this comes into one of those big-time regret moments as a kid. I had purchased this when I was about 12 years old, and I also purchased it with the Jack Lane Physical Fitness because I was kind of a chunky kid. And it was pretty advanced. I mean, it gave you 64K of memory. The keyboard was felt very good. It had a built-in tape drive with an audio track, and it was computer controlled. So it was kind of like the Atom, where it was able to seek data on the cassette and at the same time play an audio track. So Jack Lane would be loading its graphics and going through its program, and Jack Lane would be talking to you at the same time, which was kind of amazing back then. And the Intellivision sat right in there. I mean, it was kind of big, but I wanted a motorcycle, and the video game crash had happened, and everyone was kind of getting out of video games, so I sold it for $200. I mean, I had no idea only 4,000 were made, and that Mattel had recalled them because they were simply too expensive to make, and they weren't going to sell as many as they wanted to, and they would be taking a huge loss on it. So instead, they went back to the drawing board, and because of lawsuits that they were getting hit with, came out with a computer component, which I'm going to show you again in 1 second. So as you can see, compared to that keyboard, this is really nothing even close to it. This was basically simply made to appease the lawsuits that were going against Mattel, because there were tons of lawsuits by the government stating they were being deceitful and not releasing a keyboard component. This thing is pretty much worthless. It's got 4K of RAM. It's very limited. I got it just because I was really cheap at KB Toys back in the day, but it really just sits in its box. It's completely worthless. I do have this one cartridge that does run with it, which is Scooby-Doo's Maze Chase. I think it uses some of the extra sound channels that are in here. But other than that, it's just not a great game. And the Intellivision was really known for, more than anything, its sports games. And they really did have some good sports games. Now, comparable to the Atari 2600, I always found the Intellivision slow. I know that's kind of weird saying it's a 16-bit console, but for me, the gameplay always seemed a lot more slow. Space Marauder over here, which is a Space Marauder clone, in my opinion, plays very slow. Star Strike's a good game. We'll go through some of these games a little bit later, but some of them are just not good. But then there are other ones that are just my favorites, like Space Spartans here, which is pretty much like Atari Star Raiders. It's a ripoff, but has speech when you have it connected to the IntelliVoice module. Bomb Squad's another good speech game. B-17 Bomber is another great speech game. One of my favorite games is Tron Deadly Discs. I know the Angry Video Game Nerd made fun of it, not being able to play it.
Shit the fuck!
But it's a great game, and he was just making fun of it. This is a fantastic game. Space Battle, Night Stalker, Space Hawk, and Dungeons & Dragons. It did have some really good games, and there's some bad games too. Again, ColecoVision released Donkey Kong on the Intellivision. It's just another bad port, In all honesty, again, like the 2600, I'm sure it was made bad on purpose, so you would rather have their ColecoVision in their version of it. Demon Attack here is a pretty good version of Demon Attack, but again, it seems to play slower. And I think the overall issue with a lot of these games are the controllers here. I have one here out, and I'll explain to you why I have this one like this a little bit later in the video. But these controllers, they're not good and they're not bad, and I'll explain. Now, the Intellivision was the first to start going away from one joystick, 8 positions, and one fire button. They were trying to give you more, but in all honesty, this just really didn't work out too well. Now, the numeric keypad, again, the angry video game nerd make a lot of fun of this. But the whole point of this keyboard is not to use this per se. You would take an overlay, say like Space Battle here, and I'm going to try and put this in here with one hand, and you would slide these overlays in, just like the ColecoVision, the Atari 5200, and the Jaguar. So, you know, when you put this in like this, now you have all these extra buttons to do things on. So that made it a lot more advanced. But we're really stunk with these. The fire buttons, they're on the side here. They're very mushy. They're hard to know when you press them in. There's no real feedback. It's hard to hold the controller. And they were always touting this as a 16 position versus 8 for the Atari 2600. And that's why the 5200 came out with its joystick. But this is actually horrible. It's just, the games, again, released in this age, you didn't need something like this. This thing just absolutely stinks. They made aftermarket parts where you could put a joystick in here, and it made it a lot better. These were priced around $19.95 back in the day, and basically you remove the disc and put this joystick in its place. But this was bad. And then they made the Intellivision 2, which was a cost reduced and a slightly smaller unit, where the controllers were removable. But they somehow had made this even worse. They raised this all up here, and it's just, a lot of these games would be a lot more fun, to be honest, if you had a better controller. I mean, these are really bad. I'm going to go over what they kind of did, kind of like when Nintendo did later on with their directional pad kind of controller. They actually made the market go a different way, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, let's just look at the controller really quickly. There is a numeric keypad at the top with very responsive buttons and a 16-position disc at the bottom. There are 2 sets of buttons on each side that, in my opinion, are very mushy and very little feedback on them. The controller itself is pretty light and pretty thin. It did fit in your hand okay, but it didn't feel like much in your hands. But most of the programs came with overlays to put on the numeric keypad to enhance the gameplay. So you can see that, like Nintendo did later on with their directional pad, making Sega and other companies start to copy them, a lot of people actually copied the Intellivision. The Intellivision had its directional pad and its numeric keypad here, and had 2 buttons on each side. After that, we had the ColecoVision come out. Did the same thing. They put a joystick at the top. It didn't fare much better than this. It's just so stiff. But if I had a choice between these two, I would probably take the ColecoVision controller. It's only got 1 action button on each side, but it's got the keypad, and you can still slide overlays here. So they kind of made this happen. And then, of course, Atari says, well, if you guys are going to do 16 positions, we're going to do a full analog 360-degree joystick, and we're going to give you a start button and a pause button and a reset button, a numeric keypad and buttons on the side. And this actually is not a bad joystick when it works. You know, a lot of the games are not really designed for the analog here, and you can buy aftermarket devices that will let you use digital. But I know a lot of people really rip on this joystick, but it's really not bad when it works. I have to add that. There are things you can do. I have a video that explains how you can repair them, and they're not too bad. And if I had a choice between all 3 of these, if this guy's working, I would take this joystick over both of these, honestly. But if this was not working, I would take the ColecoVision over the Intellivision controller. And of course, Atari, one last time, threw its hat into the ring with the Jaguar, and they came out with the same thing, this time a digital direction pad, your select and start buttons and fire buttons, and the same thing. They added a keypad, and I know people really rip on it, why they do this, which is so stupid. They did this to give you buttons you can change. You put an overlay on them, and they become anything. Regular Nintendo controllers and Sega controllers, you really couldn't do that. But the Dreamcast, kind of, you could do something with that on-screen display. But this was really not a bad idea. Sometimes, yes, you had to look down at the controller, but it gave you a lot more options. And I know people rip on this joystick as well, but to be honest, it's very comfortable in the hands. And again, if I had my choice, I would take this over all of these here as the best joystick. But if the Jaguar is not involved, If this is working, this would be my best. If it's not working, this would be my best. And then my least favorite. But again, you could see here, just by looking at these different companies, and there's more. There's also the Arcadia 2001 that really copied this controller down. I made it even cheaper, if you can believe it. But I'll do a video on that. I have an Emerson Arcadia 2001 as well. Okay, I'm just going to throw this in real quick. I will do a separate video on the Arcadia 2001, but I just wanted to show you the controllers here. You can see that they did make them very similar to the Intellivision's controllers, except the numeric keypad on the Intellivision has a very good tactile feedback and feels like high quality, where on the Arcadia 2001 they're very flimsy and feel very cheap. There's one button on each side versus two on the Intellivision, but on the 16 position pad here you can see you can insert a joystick. So the paddle, or they say the disc, shouldn't call it a paddle, the disc works the same way as Intellivision and is just as bad without the joystick. With the joystick it does help. So the Intellivision you can add an aftermarket joystick, and I will say that at least the Arcadia 2001 gives you that option out of the box, and it does help the games. But as far as the Arcadia itself, it's definitely not as good as the Intellivision. But they even copied the joystick. So Intellivision did make a mark on controller the way Nintendo has done today. So I'm going to explain to you why I have an extra Mattel Intellivision controller here when I said my other ones were all fine from the original console. The original Intellivision, they were hardwired, as you can see here. They would go right inside the console. But if you do buy one of these or have one of these, you can get something like one of these little guys. Here, this is a ColecoVision and Intellivision adapter for your computer. So you can use this little adapter right here. See, it plugs in. It's a DB9. And you would plug your Intellivision version 1 into here. And then you can play the emulators on the PC with a real controller, as bad as it is. But if you wanted to do that, you could. And then all you would do is you would pop this little piece off right here, like so. That's a little tight. And now you can plug a ColecoVision into the same adapter. So I'll put a link down below to these. These are good. He actually makes it for the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the Atari 2600 with the panels, also the Bally Astrocade, if you have an original Bally Astrocade controller, and MES emulator. You can actually use a real controller with that as well. So he makes some good things here, and I do enjoy these. So that's why I have this extra controller here, just for things like this adapter. So another thing we just want to talk about here is the console itself. You know, it's typical wood grain. And a lot of people say that this was the beginning of the very first console war, the Mattel Intellivision versus the Atari 2600. And that's also not true. There was actually a smaller war before the Atari Intellivision one. And it was between the Atari 2600, then known as the Atari VCS, and the Fairchild Channel F, back then known as the VES. When Fairchild released their console, they had released the very first cartridge-based gaming console, before the Atari did. And they called their system the Video Entertainment System, or VES. So when Atari was getting to release its cartridge-based system, they wouldn't call theirs the VCS, a Video Computer System. And Atari did that on purpose. They were starting a war with Fairchild, and they wanted confusion between the Fairchild VES and the Atari's VCS. And Fairchild obviously didn't fare too well. They changed the name to the Channel F, and it was a very primitive system, still the very first console. I have one, I love it. But Atari won that war. So this was not the first video game war. If anything, it was between the Atari 2600 and the Fairchild Channel F. The second war, however, was definitely the Mattel Intellivision and the Atari 2600. And, you know, it's kind of like how Sega was with Nintendo. Intellivision never really caught up to the success of the 2600. Probably the biggest reason was they didn't have their own arcade division where Atari did. They had licensed a lot of great games. You know, all they could do was make some rip-off titles of some things that were already done on the Atari. It did have better graphics. It had much better. Mattel Electronics even hired George Plimpton to be a spokesperson for their Intellivision to tout how good their sports titles were. Let's have a look at some of his commercials.
I'll try almost anything. So when Mattel Electronics asked me to compare their Intellivision games with Atari, I gave it a try. I compared Atari Baseball with Intellivision and found Intellivision played much more like real baseball. Then I compared Atari football with Intellivision. Again, Intellivision played more like the real game. In my opinion, if you try them both, there's only one conclusion you can come to. Intellivision from Mattel Electronics. I've been making more comparisons between Mattel Electronics Intellivision and Atari. Different games, but the same results. Look at Atari basketball and Intellivision. I think Intellivision plays much more like real basketball. Here's Atari soccer and Intellivision. Again, I find Intellivision more sophisticated and lifelike. If you try them both, I think you'll find the clear winner is Intellivision from Mattel Electronics.
The other downside to the Intellivision, where it's not so much the Atari 2600 and other consoles, almost all the games, not all, but the majority of the fun games are all two-player. Like their sports games like football, baseball, you couldn't play these with one person. You had to have another person there, which is fine if you have someone to play. But there's times where you come home from school and there's no friends home, they got to do the homework. And a lot of the great games you couldn't play because you needed someone else to play it with you. So enough talking. I'm going to go and get my son, and we're going to play some of these games and see how they come out. But I just wanted to give you a quick run-through of the system here itself, and let's get to it. Okay, before we can actually start the games, I guess I need to talk about something I'm sure everyone knows already about these old systems. You put a cartridge in, and you get a blank screen. So fortunately, with the Intellivision, it's a little easier to get to the cartridge contacts to clean them. Most of the cartridges have two screws on the side without the label. Remove the two screws, and you have direct access to the cartridge. And just usually I just use a pencil eraser and clean off the corrosion. You can see here they're very dirty. Once these contacts were cleaned, everything worked perfectly fine, and now we could start to play.
Mattel Electronics presents Space Spartans. Mattel Electronics presents Space Spartans.
Hello, Commander. Computer reporting. Hello, Commander. Computer reporting. Repairs on.
So once you get into this screen where you can start fighting the enemies, this is where that 16 position pad becomes a bit of a pain. It's not very accurate, and it's a little difficult to try and move the cursor around the screen. It's a pretty fun game. I mean, you do get used to the directional pad after a while, but I do think a joystick would have been a lot easier. So this is one of my favorite games on the Intellivision. The IntelliVoice does sound really well and adds a lot of fun factor, I think, to the game. There's no question that this was an absolute rip-off of Atari Star Raiders, although they pulled it off quite well. It's a little more choppy as far as the controls. The Intellivision with scrolling I always felt was a little more choppy, but I can't deny that it's a really fun game. They definitely took the Atari formula for Star Raiders and kicked it up a few notches. It's a great game.
Starbase 1 under attack. Starbase 3 under attack.
Shield 1/3 down. Hyperdrive off.
Starbase 1 under attack.
Shield 2/3 down. Battle computer 1/3 down.
Starbase 3 under attack.
Repair on. Tracking computer 2/3 under repair. Impulse drive, 1/3 down.
Starbase 1 under attack. 1 alien. Starbase 1 under attack.
Hyperdrive destroyed. Tracking computer destroyed. Impulse drive destroyed. Battle computer destroyed.
Starbase 1 under attack.
Tracking computer destroyed. Shield destroyed.
The battle is over.
An identity disc. Everything you do or learn will be imprinted on this disc. You will be subject to immediate de-resolution. That will be all.
This was one of my favorite movies as a kid and one of my favorite games on the Intellivision. I just think that overall they captured what this movie was about in this one particular game, and I absolutely loved it. Would play it until all hours of the night.
Hey, who's that guy?
That's Tron. He fights for the users.
Tron.
It was going to be so cool to actually play a game based on this movie.
I'd like to go against you and see what you're made of. I've got a little challenge for you, Sark. A new recruit. He's a tough case. Train him for the games. Let him hope for a while and blow him away.
You got it.
Now this is one of my favorite games on the Intellivision. I know the Angry Video Game Nerd made fun of it, but to be honest, using the keypad for your fire buttons was pretty good because you can use your directional pad to move your man around and you can fire in any direction you want to at the same time. I can remember me and my friends being up to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning playing this game.
I feel a presence. Another warrior is on the mesa.
Well, here's another example of how the Intellivision's advanced 16-position disc is not always well suited for the game. In a game like Donkey Kong, you want to be able to move up, down, left, and right, 4 directions, fairly easy. With the disc, when you're pressing up, it could read a little bit up to the left or up to the right, and sometimes not make it easy or as intuitive to move your character around. Again, the more you use the disc, you do get used to it, and it becomes less of an issue. But it still requires more concentration to move your character around than it should if you had a joystick, in my opinion. it's really obvious that Star Strike drew its inspiration from the original Star Wars film that was only out a few years earlier. And it's a pretty good game. Graphically, it's really nice. It looks like you're traveling down the Death Star trench and you need to destroy the planet killer before it blows up your planet. The gameplay is a little repetitive, but it still was a pretty fun game back in the day. Night Stalker.
I thought it was okay, but I couldn't really move that well.
So the controller of the disc is hard to use, right? It's not like a joystick, right?
Yeah, I thought you actually had to just like touch it. I didn't know you had to push it. Oh. Space Armada. Whoa. So Space Invaders!
Space Armada.
I don't think I need to answer that question. I think you saw the look on my face. That was horrible.
What made it so hard? Was it the controller again?
No. Too fast and, no, too tiny. Didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
No.
You like regular Space Invaders better, right?
Yeah. Astro Smash. peasy lemon squeezy. It's like popping a balloon.
So how did you find Astro Smash?
It was okay. Not one of my favorite games. It's cool how you can teleport them.
Would you play that one again?
If I had to, yeah. But it's not one of my favorite games, but it was still good.
So how did the Intellivision fare? Well, very well. It is one of my favorite systems. I do have issues with the disc controller. The 16-position disc, in my opinion, was more trouble than it was worth. I do feel it detracts from the majority of the games. Some games are better with it, but I would say the majority of them don't fare well with that disc. But the console, there's no question, made a huge mark in the early gaming history. It was the one true competitor for the Atari 2600. It was never able to overtake it, but it did have a library of some good original games. Again, a lot of games were clones or rip-offs of games already on the Atari, but they did make some small changes to them to make it its own. And there's no question that the sports games on the Intellivision for its time were the absolute best in the business. And it had some great games like Discs of Tron, which is one of my favorites, and the speech synthesizer games like Bomb Squad, B-17 Bomber, and absolutely Space Spartans. And even though Space Spartans was a blatant rip-off of Star Raiders, they did make some changes to make it a little more advanced, and the speech really did enhance the gameplay. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you don't have an Intellivision and do come across one at a fair price, I definitely say pick one up. I would definitely skip the computer keyboard attachment, but definitely the Intellivision and IntelliVoice would definitely make a great addition to anyone's retro gaming collection.